Hello, everybody. Welcome to the episode of Serani SEMBANG, the World Live Webcast. And I'm Bridget Catherina Emuang, founder of Serani SEMBANG, and someone who got a little bit busy 4 weekends ago and launched this webcast for the community, as well as for us to have an opportunity to perhaps grapple with this new technology at a time when most of us were locked down in our homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while things are kind of relaxing and we're slowly kind of like sliding back into normalcy, we still have wonderful opportunities to kind of like, think about new things that we could be doing with the kind of spare time that as we drift back into normalcy begins to kind of like reduce. I like the lockdown because it got me onto this project, and I was very happy to be able to drag along with me kicking and screaming various individuals. This weekend, for this show on World Population Day, decreed by the United Nations, I have been able to drag two new people into the show, and I'm very happy to have both of them here. They are both Seranis with academic qualifications that are really very respectful and admirable. And the first one, the first Serani that I'm going to introduce is actually located very far away from us in a time zone that is, I think, 1.5 hours difference. And she is Dr. Ione Jolly in Darwin, Australia. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Nice to have you on the show.
It's really wonderful to be here, Vernon.
And the last time we actually shared the screen together was sometime last year in October, I think, when we were both on television, right? And and I guess I got so bitten by that bug, I started my own television show here.
You missed being on TV, yeah.
Yeah, I miss being on TV. And give us a little bit of background about yourself and, how you ended up as a Serani person, how you ended up in Darwin, Australia.
Okay, so I'm born in Darwin, but my mother, Teresa Mitchell, was born in Singapore in 1958 and moved up to KL or PJ as a baby, and then came out to Australia in 1968. And they actually came to Katherine, which is 300 kilometers inland from Darwin. So tiny little town. There's only 2 Asian families at that point in time. A lot of my mother's family migrated to Darwin. So I had my grandparents, my great-grandparents, some grandaunts and uncles, first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins. I had my grandma's first cousins. It was like our family when I was little, the birthday parties would have 100 people at them, and they were all family. Yeah. So I've been raised within the microcosm of the Darwin Eurasian community, and with people born in the late 1800s, so with much older generation. So like my great-grandfather, who was born in, I think, 1894, 1906, used to babysit me when I was little.
Right. Okay. So you are very, very close to your Serani ancestry through your grandparents, your mother and your grandparents, right? And we have a video further down the line which we will show the viewers, where you're interviewing your mother as she actually cooks Serani sambal tauco, right, in Darwin, Australia. That'll be later.
Yeah,
but meanwhile,
I was saying I went to UWA, did Asian studies, wanted to go on an exchange, and the options were Hong Kong, Singapore, and Penang. And because my grandpa Honey Mitchell was from Singapore and my grandma Phyllis or Sophie Richards was from Penang, I'm like, okay, one of those. And the exchange rate was much better with Malaysia at that point. So I'm like, let's go to Penang. I can practice my Malay.
Yeah. And you ended up, how long did you end up in Penang?
1 year. So 2001, 2002 academic years. Our family had those connections with Malaysia and Singapore for my grandparents going backwards and forwards and some relatives coming out. But it was only after I spent that year in Penang that we really deeply started recollecting, and because flights got cheaper, we started going back home a lot more.
Right. Okay. So because of because of cheaper flights, because of I guess all that you said. Malaysia as an ancestral home for you became more accessible and more interesting and more easy to get to.
It was always a mental ancestral home because my grandparents used to talk about it a lot and tell me their family stories a lot. So, you know, that whole Thai princess is the ancestor of a lot of the Penang Eurasians. My grandmother, I remember her telling me that when I was little. It's just, we weren't the ones going back. It was my grandparents were the ones going back. So we had the food, we had the different cultural habits or whatever here. I just didn't have a lived experience of Singapore or Malaysia. And I've been back nearly every year since, and that's nearly 20 years.
Okay. I wanted to bring in our second guest, but he's kind of like disappeared off the screen, so I don't know what's happening here.
You know, the internet in Ampang is bad.
Yes. We are grappling with emerging technology, webcasting technology, and so viewers, please forgive us. We've had lots of goof ups, and we will continue to have lots of goof ups. But I don't know. I'm enjoying discovering it and trying to learn as much as I can. So Irony, if you are game, we can start off with your presentation while we wait for our second guest, Dr. Richard Dorrell, to come back at some point in time. He's kind of like dropped out of the screen from our backstage area. So I think it's his internet connection. So let us get on with some pictures and stuff that you wanted to show us. Yeah.
Did you want me to talk you through these?
Yes, talk us through this. Yeah. So okay. First, wait. Let me tell.
PhD was.
Sorry. Yeah? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I did my honors.
Wait. Before you start, let me start by how you got onto Serani Sembang. Right. Serani Sembang was founded in 2003, but has a 20-year history because Serani Sembang came from the Emuang family website, which started 20 years ago. And when Serani Sembang started, it was a genealogical website for Serani people to get together and explore their ancestry, their Serani ancestry, their Eurasian ancestry. And this was because church records helped our folk trace our ancestry much further back than our Asian ancestry, because there was documented evidence in church documents and stuff like that. And as you in Australia explored your ancestry, you met up with some Serani people in Sweden, right? Was it in Sweden?
Yeah, in Örebro in Sweden. So Avril Pasquale, Freddie Boudville and Lorraine Kung were all living in Örebro. And I had met up with a Pascal cousin in the Eurasian Association in Singapore, and I'm like, I'm going backpacking in Scandinavia. Are there any Eurasians you can give me contact details for? So he gave me Avril's, which was his cousin. And I went back and visited her many, many times. The first time I ever cooked babi tahu on my own was for Avril in Sweden when she was not well. I'm like,
babi tahu.
Yeah, I'll make it for you, and then we'll freeze it and everything, and yeah.
That's so cute. So you get Avril's address from her cousin in Singapore, and you go to Sweden. Okay, so it was a mutual cousin. Yeah. So then you get to Sweden, you meet up with her, and then she puts you in touch with Serani Sembang. Correct?
I was staying with her, so she put me in touch with Serani Sembang. Yeah.
So basically, you got onto Serani Sembang via Singapore and Sweden. You went one big way around the world before you hooked up with the rest of us, and then you became part of that Serani, that Serani Sembang family, right? And what did you discover from that experience?
Let's think.
Do you remember what it was like? I mean, like the connecting with all these people.
Younger generation on Serani Sembang. So it was really interesting reading what everyone had written and how they were interacting, because they were sharing memories of their lived experiences in Malaysia and Singapore as well, and their memories of people that they'd met. Whereas I'm one generation removed from that, so I don't have like, okay, yeah, I might know my auntie or uncle, but the people who are writing was like, oh, I went to school with them and this is what we did. So I was getting a lot more information from that. In terms of my genealogy, my great-grandmother in Darwin, Henrietta or Rita Baptist, she actually wrote down and made my mum write down family lineages before she died in the mid-80s. And so she could do 7 generations, all the middle names, everything perfect from memory. So we also have family Bibles. So what I was getting was not my direct lineage, but my extended family.
Yeah. And which extended even far greater and far wider when you discovered Serani Sembang, right? That's what happened to most people.
Well, I babysit my 4th cousin in Darwin, so my family's kind of wide anyway, but it just got bigger. Yeah.
It spreads out.
It does.
Okay. Before we go any further, and I'll come back to you because I want to introduce our next guest. Very happy to have him here. Okay. Dr. Dorel, are you ready? Hi, Doc. Hi, Doc. Your internet's a bit dodgy. So I think there's a little bit of staggering and lagging. So when you can, just jump in when you hear me pause. Oh, I'm hearing myself back. Introduce our next guest. Okay, you should not be watching the program on Facebook. Doc, are you there? What a shame. Okay, because Dr. Richard Dorel is actually we can hear you, but only just. Okay, Dr. Richard Dorel, if I may introduce him to you while we wait to see if he kind of stabilizes, because sometimes that happens. He is a population expert, our very own Serani population expert, here on Serani Sembang on World Population Day, and he's got vast experience in working with population statistics, demographics, etc. And I wanted to find out from him how he felt about the way the world is going, because one of the reasons apparently for World Population Day is to bring attention to the fact that the world population expanding at an incredibly exponential rates, and we are putting a lot of, you could say, stress on the planet. And but more interesting than that is the fact that our community, our Serani community, actually comes from different populations, and migration is very much a part of our character, as Ione here will testify. And also that whole idea of like populations tend to spread, different lifestyle practices, etc. So like Ione's mother, Catherine Teresa Mitchell, right? Teresa Catherine Mitchell, right? Is in Darwin as we speak, teaching her grandchildren how to cook sambal teochew, and stuff like that. And so it's quite interesting to see this thing happening. Doc, are you fine there? Can we get a word from you? Dr. Dorel? Oh, this is really, I'm so sorry, viewers, and I'm so sorry to Dr. Richard, because it must be stressing him out no end. But for some reason, the internet isn't really helping out. Yeah. Okay. Doc, I'm going to go to Ione, and we're going to do her bit first, and I hope to come back to you, and I hope that at some point things will stabilize and we'll have you full on here, okay? So I'm going to put you backstage, right? And kind of like work with Ione. So Dr. Richard, don't stress out, take it easy. We will talk with Ione, and we'll have you back once things perhaps maybe stabilize on your end. I see some signs of life now. Let me bring him back. Are you okay there? No, because sometimes it takes a bit of while. I mean, like I was interviewing Margie Calladay in San Diego 2 shows ago. And when we first started, it was buggy and horrible. But as we proceeded, it became better and better. And after that, it was so clear and wonderful. So let's hope that works. That's the way it works with Dr. Richard Dorrell as well. Okay, never mind. He's still frozen. Yeah. Sorry, Doc. I'm going to put you backstage and come back to you. Ayoni. Okay, let's go to the little. We were talking about how you got onto Serani Sembang, right? Mm-hmm. And so, can you share with us? So you discovered these people. You notice certain similarities between the stories that you heard and the stories that you were now hearing on Serani Sembang.
I didn't. So my grandfather was still alive when I went on Serani Sembang. So I would ask him some of the information from Serani Sembang, show him some of the pictures, but we also have a large picture collection within our family. Some of it was communicating with other relatives who were doing research. A lot of it was me just reading stories. Some of it was me getting confused. You know how a lot of Eurasians have two names, like family name, outside name? So I think it was Anita Hope was talking about how she went to school with one of my grand aunties and she really knew her well and she's using a specific name for her. And I'm like, that's not her name. And
she used another name for her. And what was that other name? Do you remember?
I can't remember. I think she was using Rita and we used Tony, or she was using Tony and we used Rita.
Okay,
Her real name was Antoinette.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that in our family. Like I've got a cousin that I always referred to as Auntie Sweetie. And someone once said to me, oh, Linda Cornelius. And I'm like, who's that? And they're like, Sweetie. And I'm like, I didn't know Sweetie wasn't her name. I just assumed Sweetie was her name. Like, I've got a cousin called Lovey, so why can't I have a cousin called Sweetie? But yeah, I should have gone back. I did my honours thesis on the experiences of the Eurasian community during World War II. And then for my PhD, I looked at the post-World War II Eurasian exodus from Malaysia and Singapore to Australia, primarily in the 60s and early 70s towards the end of the White Australia period. So
the White Australia period, the White Australia policy came to an end what year exactly?
Somewhere between 73 and 75, because so the policy ended, but the application of the policy took a while to end.
The application of
I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but you make a policy in Canberra. By the time you
it reaches the common man. It took a while. Okay.
I can't remember.
Okay, and I just want to reiterate again that your PhD was researching the immigration documents of Eurasian people migrating from Singapore and Malaysia into Australia, even as the Australian White Australia policy was coming to an end. So you
they had a specific category for us called mixed descent. And so there was a category for us under the policy. I've read hundreds and hundreds of files, migration files, from the High Commission in Kuala Lumpur, the Australian High Commission. Unfortunately, they didn't bother to find any of the Singaporean files on the Singaporean end. They were hidden in a warehouse somewhere in Canberra for many, many years, and they only found them after I finished my PhD. But I have. So
this is what documents that were like 40 years old, 50 years old?
They'd be anywhere between 45 and 60 years, most of them.
Right. Okay. And when you 45, so therefore when you saw them, they'd be like 40 years to 55. I'm just trying to figure out, because I had relatives who came at that time.
I've seen some of them, like Cinnamon.
Yes, my cousin Cinnamon. You've actually found her document. It's quite interesting how suddenly you get to go behind the curtains to see how people were assessed, whether they were good enough to come into Australia, right? And can you share with us very quickly, key points about your discoveries?
Okay, depending on what year they came through, there was different how Asian you were allowed to be. But basically,
okay.
So they had changes in policies in the 50s, in 64, 67, 69, 70s. Towards the end of the 60s, it became predominantly European in appearance, but it was more, if you could impress the immigration officer, if you had more of a moderate to high-end accent, if you had Western hobbies and Western friends, and if the immigration officer was in a good mood that day, your children were well behaved, things like that. There was a lot of, basically, if they thought you would fit into Australia. Some of it came down to colour and how you appeared, but a lot of it was more intangible than that. So, for example, I've read hundreds of these applications, and just before I handed everything in, we came across my grandpa's file. And my grandpa worked for an Australian company. I didn't reference this in the PhD because it was too late, but my grandpa worked for an Australian company, had a lot of Australian friends, and the interview was a complete stitch up. So they wrote lovely, glowing report on my grandfather, which on other people, I've seen people with the same amount of savings, the same job, the same employment sort of background where he chop and change jobs every 4 years, lots of children, that sort of thing. I've seen them have horrible assessments. Grandpa's was glowing. I think it was a stitch up. It probably helped that the children were extremely well behaved and the entire family was charming. But yeah, it's really hard to tell. I've got two distant cousins, like second cousins, same backgrounds, same appearance. They looked quite Chinese or Thai. And in the 50s, one got rejected, one got approved. Neither of them went. In the 60s, when they reapplied, the one who got approved got rejected, and the one who got rejected got approved.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow, how peculiar.
It's a little bit,
Yeah. Okay. What I would like to do is bring on your slides so you can talk a little bit about the situation, because our poor Dr. Richard Dorrell is still struggling to get, stable internet, and it's so unfortunate. So we'll just power through.
We'll start with me and then we'll wing it.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see
so,
what we do here. Yeah. Okay. So your family ancestry is Mitchell and Richards. Your Richards was your mother's mother.
My grandmother
Sophia
is Richards. My grandfather's a Mitchell. Then you've got Baptist, D'Souza, McIntyre. You name it, we have it.
All the Serani surnames you can think of. Yeah.
Well, the Eurasian story is a story of migration. And you can tell when you go to the first slide, it's a picture from Muka Lighthouse in Penang, where my great-grandfather Raymond Richards was the lighthouse keeper. So the gentleman in the middle is Paul.
That's amazing. The gentleman, that's your great-grandfather.
No, the younger guy is my great-grandfather. The gentleman in the middle is my great-great-grandfather, Paul William Richards. And so his father had been born in India, came to Australia somehow, and then moved to Singapore and basically founded the detective force there. And Paul Williams' brother, Charles, is the one who, Richard's estate in Singapore belonged to his brother. So these guys, born in Singapore, moved up to Penang, but there was a lot of that movement within the peninsula. Dada, my great-grandfather, born in Singapore, lived most of his life in Penang, migrated to Darwin in 1980. So he lived out the rest of his years in Darwin.
Right. Okay, so once again, this is your great-grandparents.
My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandfather.
Okay, so there are 3 generations here.
Yep, there's 3 generations there.
Okay, and the 2 boys in the front one of them is your grandfather. Is that correct?
Actually, one of the girls is standing is my grandmother. The 2 boys in the front are still alive. One of them's still alive. They're my granduncles.
I see. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Have you
been to Muka? The little boy on the left-hand side is about to turn 90.
Wow. That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, Uncle Lawrence. He lives at Little Sisters of the Poor in Penang.
And you were supposed to come over for his 90th birthday. Is that correct?
We were going to have a joint 70th and 90th birthday for another cousin, Auntie June, and Uncle Lawrence, and a whole pile of family were coming. We were meant to be there right now or a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
and clearly that didn't happen.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move it right along.
The next photo is post-war. So that's my grandma.
Yeah.
Sophie Richards. When she was.
Look at her. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she was engaged to my grandpa at that stage. And he was off with the British Army in Singapore earning some money.
Right. Sophie Richards. And she was Penang born. Was she Penang born?
Penang born, where her descendants like Jeremiah Peterson. So her family had been Penang born for a very long time.
Right. So your grandparents, one was from Singapore and one was from Penang. Interesting. I mean, like, you know, there are a lot of these trans kind of like, you know, intercity, I mean, the Serani hotspots like Penang, Malacca, and Singapore, and how those Serani people kind of like got together. And usually it's the church that brings them together.
Well, this story is a bit different. My grandmother's brother married my grandfather's sister, and they actually met in the Bahau camp in Negeri Sembilan during the war. So they got married after the end of the war. My grandmother was still living in Penang. My grandfather was driving a truck, came up to see his sister, and before he could get to the house, he actually, according to Grandpa, he knocked my grandmother off her bicycle at a roundabout.
Oh my God.
It had nothing to do with church at all. You got first the war at the civilian internment camp, and then you got
he bowled her over.
Driver. He bowled her over, yes. I don't recommend that as a way to pick people up, but
okay. And the next slide is.
So before they came out to Australia, so my grandfather and my oldest uncle came out first because the Australian government wouldn't let everyone come at one go because they said you won't be able to afford to support them in Darwin on the wage you'll be earning. So they went first. The rest stayed behind, staying with our cousin Margie Thomas in KL or PJ. And this is, my mom is like the middle girl at the front. And there's a pile of Thomas cousins there. They were related on my grandfather's side and interrelated like Eurasians are. But Mum said before they came out to Australia, they had to learn how to use a knife and fork because they hadn't really used a knife much before. Because, you know, spoon and chopsticks and whatever. But yeah, so they're using spoons there, but they were learning how to use cutlery.
Okay.
Not
so this was a training session, is it?
I think it was a training session. So they could eat Asian style, but they couldn't eat Western style yet, the kids.
Right. Okay. And so this is
that's Uncle Dennis Richards, who's still living in Singapore. So the family used to go back and visit, and that was my mom on a visit she made with a friend of hers in the late 70s. So Uncle Dennis is Mom's godfather, and he worked for the Far East in Singapore, and then he went to work for Singapore Airlines. So he used to fly out a lot, bring us supplies of like ikan bilis and
fly to Darwin.
Fly to Darwin and visit my grandmother and him had this thing where they would surprise each other and just knock on the door. Hello, I'm here.
So sweet, so sweet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, my grandmother was 16 when he was born, so she helped raise him.
Okay.
This is the front page of the application for entry for residence in Australia. I think it's a M47 form. And I don't know when they started using it, but it was definitely in use in the late 60s. And I've seen so many of them. When you look at this, the interesting bit was always the nationality. So whether people put themselves down as Malaysian, Eurasian, British Eurasian, there was so many variants and combinations on this.
Right.
Yeah, you could tell whether someone had gotten approved for coming to Australia when you open the file based on whether that for official use had a big stamp on it.
Oh, okay. For official use had a big stamp on it. Right. So this was the form that was presented to your grandfather when he applied to come. And he filled this up.
You couldn't just get the form, you had to pre-qualify. So you either called up, you wrote to them, or you went in person, and if they didn't feel that you even met the basic elements of what they were looking for, they wouldn't give you the form. So I've seen a file where someone had sent a form in and there's a note written on it, we don't know how this person got the form. So when you're looking at the statistics on how many people applied, how many people got rejected, accepted, we don't even know how many people were rejected before they could even start to apply.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's my grandfather when he arrived in Perth Airport in '68, and there was a lot more photos, but because we had Cyclone Tracy, which blew Darwin away on Christmas Eve 1974, there are big gaps in our photo collection. So there are no photos of my mum arriving in Darwin, though I know there would have been photos in the past, but that photo album clearly blew away with the cyclone. Yeah,
I remember because just to give viewers some insight into how we are kind of like linked. This gentleman, Grandpa Mitchell, I knew him as Honey Mitchell, and I was kind of like, I think like 6 or 7 years old when Honey Mitchell and his family, among whom is your mother, Ayoni, lived in PJ Old Town. And I remember going with either my father or my grandfather to visit your family and hearing about how they were migrating to Australia. And I remember that there was a bit of tragedy, right? Just before they left.
It was actually the year before they left. My oldest aunt, Ursula, was 13 and she got leukemia and she died suddenly. And so it was an incredibly stressful time for the family. I don't think they ever got over it. I don't think you can get over your daughter dying. And so it was always this thing that we left Ursula behind, which we, back in 2010, we actually went back when Grandpa was dying. One of his wishes was that we bring Auntie Ursula out to Australia. And so we went out and arranged for her disinterment, and we brought her remains to Australia so she could migrate.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a story. Quite a story. I'm trying to bring back the
PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah.
So the next one is so we lived in Katherine, well, my family lived in Katherine for a couple of years, and then the railway people realized Grandpa was colorblind, so he lost that job.
Oh no.
And he went to work on an oil rig, and then the oil rig burned down. And then he got a government job, which is a great thing for a Eurasian. And they lived in several houses. Finally, they bought one in Nakara. And Nakara was a suburb that was worst hit by the cyclone. So it got hit when the cyclone came through. And then when the cyclone, the other side came back, it got hit again. And it went down to the floorboards. So that's the house.
Wow. Incredible. That's an incredible... That's how, that was what was left of the house after Cyclone Tracy hit Darwin in late 74, I think, wasn't it?
Christmas
Boxing
Eve
Day or something.
74.
Christmas Eve 74. Yeah.
So what happened was, like my mum had been in a car with a couple of cousins. They were driving to the cathedral in the city to go to mass, midnight mass, but their car was being blown across the road, so they came home. They sheltered in the top half of the house during the first half of the cyclone, but walls were blowing in around them. Big beams blew through bedroom windows.
Wow. Yeah.
And one of my uncles, who was at someone else's house during the eye of the cyclone, came in and kicked in that back door so they could get downstairs. Somehow my grandmother's Achilles was slashed, but they spent the rest of the cyclone in the storage room underneath the house. And so this is being cleaned up a little because you can see that houses have been rebuilt across the road and that the floor is sort of solid there, and they're just putting the roof together to raise it up. But the family temporarily moved to a refugee camp in Brisbane, and then my grandmother stayed down there with the smallest children for a little while, and the older kids and my mom came back with my grandpa and they rebuilt the house. They lived in a caravan there. So my mom did her year 12 living on that building site. And my aunt now lives in that house.
Okay, so when your grandfather, did your grandfather go first before he brought the rest of the family?
When he migrated to Australia?
Yeah. Did he go first and then bring?
He came with my oldest uncle, Philip Richards. They came in June, and by September, the rest of the family came out. So what happened?
And the rest of the family numbered how many?
My grandmother and 6 children.
Okay. Yeah.
So one of his best friends from Singapore, Len Henderson, was living in Darwin, and he was a Dutch Eurasian, and they picked mum and the rest of the family up from the airport. But it had actually been that my grandmother's first cousin, Marina Lesler, whose mother was a Baptist in Penang, she'd married an Australian Air Forceman, Ron Lee, in I think 1953 maybe. She was, I think, the first one to marry one of the Butterworth guys. And she'd moved out to Australia. So Uncle Ron and Auntie Marina were living at Tyndall Air Base outside of Katherine. And they somehow connected with Grandpa and helped get Grandpa a job on the railways, which came with housing. And once they'd secured the housing, then the Australian government gave my grandfather permission to bring the rest of the family out.
Okay. So a long studied process of migration of actually what one would consider a large family, 6 children, right? So
7 surviving children.
Yeah, 7 surviving children.
My grandfather also, as part of his application, there was another nephew on the application as well, and he came out 2 years later. Right.
And so the family was kind of like reunited.
They steadily brought out more and more family.
Right. So and you, I must ask, you have an Irish father?
I have a West Australian father.
You have a West
Australian father. He's born in Perth.
Okay.
His mother's family of Irish origin. His father's family are from Cornwall, Devon, and Wales. So my dad does have a grandfather actually born in Ireland and a grandmother born in England. But the Irish has come down fairly heavily in our family. It's really quite cute. You can see it. My nephew has the same eyes as his great-great-granduncle. So, the Irish is very strong.
Okay. And but you tend to gravitate towards identifying as Serani. Am I correct in saying that? Or does it depend on situations?
It's situational. So
situational, okay. Explain that to us. Explain what situational identity is.
So your identity changes depending on what situation you're in. But I'll go with Australian first. I'll go with Darwin or Territorian. I'll say, depending on what I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about my Irish family history, I'll be like, we're Irish, or we're from, County Longford or whatever. To a lot of people, I may say my mom's Eurasian, I may say she's Singaporean, I may say she's Malaysian, depending on what message I'm trying to get across to people or which country I'm in. So when I was wearing a mask back in March, and I think I only saw 6 people with masks in Darwin, and everyone was clearly Asian looking except me. And so I'd be like, oh, my mom's from Singapore. And they'd be like, oh, that's why you're wearing a mask. I'm like, yep. So
that's really funny. Funny.
I was getting a lot of strange looks because I was the only white person I saw in Darwin wearing a mask. And I'm like, people, there are germs.
And you have told me stories about how you pass as white, but your siblings don't.
Oh, my brother passes. He's the color of paper.
Okay.
So there's 17 grandchildren in my generation. 3 of us are white. I've got my brother and one of my male cousins. So I'm the only white granddaughter.
I see. And the rest look mixed race for sure. Cannot pass as whites.
They can't pass as white. And in Darwin, it's interesting because you've got people of Aboriginal descent. And a lot of Darwin, you've had a lot of Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, Aboriginal mixing with a bit of European thrown in. So they have very similar looks to Eurasian. So my mom and my sister are more likely to be mistaken as Aboriginal than Asian or Eurasian. People don't understand the term Eurasian, so we just go with Malaysian, Singaporean, whatever. Even to the extent where my sister was in a lecture at university, and the lecturer's like, us Aboriginal people have to be proud, stand up and be proud, you three, because she was there with two of her friends, one of whom was Portuguese Timorese, and the other was from Broome, so he had mixed Aboriginal, Chinese, Malay ancestry.
Yeah, wow, and amazing.
So, my sister was trying to convince them that she was not Aboriginal, but the lecturer wouldn't believe her, so she just went along with it. But in Darwin, it gets a bit tricky because my family, when they wrote the assessment report on my family, the immigration guy, he said we're perfect candidates for assimilation. And I've never seen that on any other one, but he was right. We have assimilated into Darwin very, very well, to the extent that people don't realize we're from anywhere else. So the older children, so like mom and all the family have accents, but their accents differ depending on when they came out to Australia, how old they were.
Sure.
So the older children have more distinct accents. And so mum has a similar accent to mine, which is a little bit of that British lilt that some of the older Eurasians have. But the younger ones sound a lot more Aussie. And when we tell people who know our relatives, oh, you know, they're from Malaysia, they don't believe us. Because we have assimilated into Darwin so well that no one would believe it. And people in Darwin, because Darwin is very Asian anyway. So, and there's been trade routes between the north of Australia and Asia for hundreds and hundreds of years, before the Europeans came out. So a lot of the local community have Malay language as like Malay dialect as part of their languages. And a lot of the foods can be very similar. So I think I think it's a lot easier to feel at home here than it is in some other parts of Australia.
Right. Because it's
don't have ethnic
the closest.
either.
Right. People just mix one into each other, and I remember driving up to Carnarvon, which is the northern part of Western Australia, and
northern, sure.
Northern, well, maybe not as north as you. Okay, fine. It's not Port Hedland. It's not Port Hedland, but it's far up north where it's trying to get tropical, And I noticed that when I moved into an area where there were a lot of Indigenous Australians, the look that I would get from the Australian Aborigines was a look of acknowledgement and respect. Like they'd look at me, they'd make eye contact, and they'd nod. And these were the younger Indigenous people. And it was like as though I was an uncle of theirs, And I think it's because I was a brown person, So there was some kind of like
a brown person. There's a lot of pearl divers and that sort of thing up north, like Broome Way, and so the mixes and a lot of Malays as well as the Chinese and stuff. So the ethnic mix and the visual appearance of people, you would have fit in.
Right. Yeah. So, I got this weird kind of like the way they were acknowledging me was far different from anything I'd ever experienced before, Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. I found it really interesting.
It was a bit of an odd thing. When my grandparents went to Catherine in 1968, a lot of changes happened in Australia in 1967 with the Indigenous being counted in the census, that sort of thing. And a lot of starting to transition back to them. And people were really confused because my grandparents, they thought they looked local Indigenous, but they spoke with a British accent. So our family just confused everyone. But it did allow my grandparents to make friends on both sides of that sort of divide. In Australia.
Okay, we just got a message from Frederick Pasquale. I think this is Avril Pasquale's brother in Sydney, whom I'm going to have on the show next week, where it's going to be a music show. And Frederick is he's a musician as well as a record shop owner, I believe. So we're going to bring him on and he says, so we're related to Ione Jolly. I guess for the first time he's hearing that Ione Jolly is related to Avril Pasquale, because you mentioned it earlier on. So there you go.
Okay, so I'm related. I think it was, I don't know if it was George Pasquale. It was the former deputy head of the Singapore Eurasian Association.
Right.
So one of my Richard's cousins in Singapore married a Pasquale. So I'm related to one of your cousins in Singapore that way. But Avril and I years ago did figure out how we're distantly related. I don't know where I wrote it down. Right. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper.
We're all related, not to worry. Okay, I'm gonna bring on back the continuation of the slides. This one is interesting. Grandma Mitchell and Auntie Marge in India.
Well, there's an assumption that all Eurasians migrated to English-speaking or white countries, whereas my grandpa's older sister, Margie Mitchell, married an Indian copper in Singapore after the war, and she went back to his little village in northern India with them. So in '79, Grandpa and Grandma went and visited. So my grandma's in the middle of the photo, Auntie Margie's next to her, and then the nieces and nephews are around them.
Your grandmother looks like a really funky woman. I don't know why. Kind of like,
she was very into fashion and styling, and she did her hair all the time and did the jewelry, whereas you see this ponytail with nothing happening. Yeah.
That's not your grandma.
I started being in Darwin. We don't tend to do a lot of makeup or hair, or we walk around in shorts and t-shirts all day. But so my grandfather had multiple siblings marry foreigners. So Auntie Margie married an Indian, Auntie Tony married an Australian, Auntie Betty married English, and Auntie, there's another one.
So very multinational.
A lot of migration, and it wasn't just because they wanted to get out; it's because they married someone from another country. This is would be in the mid '80s at my grandparents' last house. The two oldest people in the middle are my great grandparents, Raymond Richards and Henrietta Baptist. Then you've got my grandparents, Honey and Phyllis. My mom off to the side, my cousin Angie next to mom. I'm the little one in the stripy dress, and then I've got a pile of cousins and my sister and my puppy dog. But it's
not
just
a
showing
dingo.
there was. Sorry?
Not a dingo.
Oh, red heeler. No, red heeler.
Oh, okay, red heeler. Yeah, okay.
But we had a multi-generational family, and we were in and out of that house every day. So Nanny was born in 1901, actually in Teluk Anson, and then raised in Penang. Dada, like 1894, 1896, I can't remember. But so we had, the older ones in my generation had a lot of exposure to our elders. So we have a different understanding of culture and food and connections than the younger ones do, purely because we grew up with the older generation. Okay.
Thanks for that. Unfortunately, I received a message from Dr. Richard Dorrell. He's at wit's end, and he's given up, and I do not blame him, because he really tried very hard. Very hard, and I just feel so sorry for him. So what I'll do is I will try and do a little bit of a podcast with him later on, because he's got actually so much to share. He was involved. Yeah, he was involved in the Council of Churches when the Allah controversy, when they were translating the Bible and stuff like that. He was there when there was this discussion about, Eurasians, how they should be termed. So he kind of like understands why I'm tending to, what's the word for it? I'm tending to bring attention to the identity label of Serani. He understands it completely. But it's also from his point of view, which is very interesting. It's not my point of view. It's not that I don't agree with him. I find it rather interesting, and I like talking to him about it. Well, we all have
different points of views on this, don't we?
Yes. Absolutely right. And just to share with everybody, it has been brought to my attention that a lot of people think that Dr. Richard Dorrell and I are arch enemies because of the heated discussions that we have. No, we're not arch enemies. I'm not arch enemy with anybody. I'm just an impassioned debater, I guess. We've shared beers. He's been to a lot of my Serani Sembang live sessions. He's always been very, very supportive, and such that he was willing to come on and talk about World Population Day. And when I found out it was World Population Day, I really wanted him on because I know he's an expert.
Well, we were having a really great chat yesterday when we were practicing, but also last year when I gave that talk in KL, and he was coming up and talking to me about modeling the Eurasian population in Malaysia and Singapore and the changes that occurred pre-war, post-war, currently, because it's quite, in the statistics there hasn't been the growth in the community there should have been, which migration's partly to account for that, but also the way that ethnic labels are applied in Malaysia and Singapore. So you get it from your father, so the Eurasian lady marries out, they're lost to the statistics. But there's also people choosing not to identify as Eurasian or whatever. And I'm going to say that I hadn't heard the term Serani until Serani Sembang, because my family...
Sorry, say again? You had what, sorry?
I hadn't heard the term Serani until Avril showed me Serani Sembang, because my family never used it.
Okay, yeah.
Like my grandfather did speak Kristang, his mother was a D'Souza, but I don't know how fluent he was, but he spoke some. But it could be that our family was slightly, like recent generations were a bit more British Eurasian. I have no idea why they didn't use it. I asked Mom, she remembers it being used, but as I said, I have no recollection until about 2005. Personally, I find the term Serani a lot more attractive than Eurasian. I think Eurasian is, firstly, it's something that's been placed on us, a term that the British used for us rather than we used originally for ourselves. It's a term so when you have Anglo-Indians, Anglo-Burmese, you've got Ceylonese Burghers, the Dutch Indos, those terms are sort of country or regional specific, whereas Eurasian, they didn't want to use it in India, so they got rid of it. They used it here, and they also used it in Hong Kong. So when people write about the Eurasians, they can be referring to the Hong Kong community, they can be referring to the Malay and Singapore community. And sometimes they produce studies where they're like, oh, the Eurasians of, Malaya and Hong Kong during the war. And I'm like, they're not the same thing. They're two completely separate communities. And they shouldn't be conflated. And by using the term Eurasian, it does conflate them. I can understand that people are more comfortable with the term because it's a term they used. When I was driving earlier today, I was thinking about it, and most of the terms that are applied to mixed race communities that we use are from the colonizers. So even like when you've got mestizo or something like that, it's a Spanish or the French colonizer gives the term. So I don't actually know any of the terms that the local communities use for the mixed race community. So I don't know what the Indonesians or the Sri Lankans use to refer to the local mixed race communities, because I've only learnt the European terms. Personally, use whatever you like, but I think Serani sounds prettier.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's unique. I think it sounds prettier.
And I don't know whether you saw episode 1, but the Carrie Ann asked me, why did I call the website Serani Sembang? And I told her why. I said when I was growing up, I heard Serani being used to label our people, and then when I entered into officialdom, I heard Eurasian, and I used Eurasian, and then I'd be asked, "Is your mother Eurasian or your father Eurasian?" And I go, "Sorry, is your father European or your mother European?" And I say neither. They both of them are Eurasian. And then the next question is, which grandparent is European? And I go, no. So then I decided like Serani was easier because it just like plunked you here, and Eurasian is generic.
Because I'm from Australia. When I go to Malaysia or Singapore, I'm Australian, and if I need to explain to them my local relationship, I use Eurasian Serani. But a lot of people don't understand either of those terms. So because I'm a historian, they get a little lecture in my family history and how, one of my earliest ancestor in Singapore that's documented was born in Singapore before the British arrived. So when I'm getting told, when I have some really nationalistic Singapore taxi driver sprouting Singapore stuff at me, I give them a little lecture on the history of Singapore, and my family's part of it, and then they just get really surprised and shocked.
Yeah.
Where did you hear, when you said you heard the word Serani, was that from within your family or was that outsiders? Was it
within my family? I mean, my grandmother spoke Malay. My grandmother was my father's mother was a lady called Dolores Chin. She was a devout Catholic. Her Bible and her prayer books are all in Malay, and she spoke to my father in Malay. And I would hear the word Serani from her, from my father, so it wasn't other people calling us Serani. It was a label that we embraced,
And this
so then there's this other response that I get where the word Serani has been seen as derogatory, but I think only against the contrasting other label of Eurasian. Like Eurasian means English, is assumed to be an English word against a Malay word Serani, but actually Serani existed long before Eurasian came along.
Also a bastardization of a Nasrani, which is not Malay. But
yeah, correct. Yeah. Okay, I just want to read something here. Frederick Pasquale probably heard what you said just now, and he went, been reading Ioni's PhD thesis on Eurasian migration to Australia. An interesting read. I'm learning a lot about my roots, even though I left for Australia in 1974 at age 18. Avril would have loved it.
Well, I actually showed the draft before it was approved, so no one else got to see it because it hadn't been marked, but I was with Avril in Sweden just after I finished it, so I showed it to her before she passed away.
Beautiful. Yeah. And for people who are listening and watching and wondering who is this Avril we are mentioning, Avril was very much a key member of Serani Sembang when it first started, and it was through her own energy and networking that helped to build it up. So that is why we do keep referring to her, because she was this human computer who could remember all the family names and how people were related.
Not just remembering, she could make the connections.
Yeah.
The most complicated connections, and she could just do it in her head. It was amazing.
Yes.
And
she was that human computer. Yeah. And
amazing.
And we were all kind of like spellbound by her every time she just like wheel it off, like a shaman.
It was
so
really
Avril, wherever you are, bless your soul, bless your heart. We miss you.
We do, and now we have to do our own work figuring out how everyone's connected.
And never ever remember as well.
But I was just actually thinking, you were listening to your grandparents and parents talk in Malay. When my grandparents and mother and some of the cousins spoke in Malay here, they used it as a secret language that the grandchildren couldn't understand. So we just ignored them. When my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my mother, the cousins spoke in Malay in Darwin, they used it as a secret language that we couldn't understand. So we just ignored them. So they may have used the term Serani when they were speaking in Malay, but we just ignored them. Yeah, because we couldn't understand anything else.
Okay, before we, we're not going to have Dr. Richard Dorrell in, which is a huge shame. But I'll try and get a podcast. Yeah, but I'll try and get a podcast going with him. However, what I want to do is I want to share. Okay, would you say like maybe 3 weeks ago, you did this thing with your mom, and I really like it. And whoever's watching, I'm going to just show you a quarter of it because it's 20 minutes long. I'm not going to make you watch it, even though it's really interesting. It's a 20 minutes long video that Ione had done with her mother, Teresa. Teresa is in her kitchen in Darwin cooking sambal taucio, which is a Serani dish. Okay, and Ione is
interviewing. Serani's cooked. Probably other people cook it too in Malaysia.
Yeah. When I say Serani because it seems to be more authentic to say Serani than Eurasian. You know what I'm saying?
Oh no, I mean I don't want to get slapped if Chinese and Malay also make it and we claim the dish and it didn't start with them.
Yeah. Serani cooking sambal turkey. Okay, and Ione does this interview with the mother and talks about their heritage and their migration and cooking and stuff like that, and it's wonderful. So if we can get more, and the rest, talk about the recipe.
It'll be up later.
The whole video I will put up later. Now I just want to show a teaser, and I want to inspire people, who have handphones that can shoot videos, to maybe do something, with your parents, with your uncles and aunties, with your aging relatives, to find out stories and maybe send it to me, and we can share it. Because
my mom is an aging relative.
No, she's not an aging relative, but she's your mother. And sorry to put her in the same. No, I mean, you know what I'm saying. Don't get me into trouble. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share this. And you guys watch it just for 5 minutes. It's actually 20 minutes long. The 20-minute version I'll put on later, but it's really cute. And for World Population Day, since we can't have Dr. Richard Dorrell as our, big kahuna gambit, we'll have Teresa Catherine Mitchell instead, who on World Population Day, we celebrate Teresa's migration to Australia and bringing with her the secrets of sambal tochu to another continent. How's that? Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Hi everyone, this is Ione Jolly and my mom Teresa Jolly, or she was named Teresa Mitchell. We would do like pictures together, but I'm not good enough at the camera to do that. So today we're going to be getting mom to make a sambal tauco while talking about her migration journey. So mom's known as a pretty good Eurasian cook, particularly in Darwin. Like, not that there's many Eurasian cooks in Darwin, because the Eurasian community here is really small. She came out to Australia. You can start doing whatever it is you're doing, Mum. Okay. Came out to Australia. That's one whole thing of garlic, lob of garlic, whatever. When she was, just before she was turned 10 in 1968, moving from PJ to Katherine in the Northern Territory with her parents, Honey Mitchell and Sophie or Phyllis Richards, whatever you know Grandma as, and her many, many, many siblings. Let's think. Sambal tauco seems to be a family favourite. I have never understood why, because personally I don't eat it.
Because you're so fussy.
Bite me, Mama. Now, do you remember eating sambal tauco before you migrated to Australia? So when you were little?
No, I don't. But I can remember Mum cooking it here.
So you don't remember it existing at all in your life, or do you think maybe it was just like an adult thing, or?
I really can't remember that. But it was something that occurred here. And obviously Mum used to cook it over there. And before she died, she said to me, she must have known, but she said to me one day, sit down and write this recipe down. I said, okay, because I was just so used to her cooking it.
Oh, so you didn't really cook sambal tauco before Grandma died in '94?
No, Mum cooked it. You know the way I cook for you and you don't cook?
Hold, I can cook. I look at the internet anyway. So you were 36 before you started cooking sambal tauco?
Yep.
Okay, so if your mother had lived to like her father's age,
she'd still be cooking.
Yeah, okay, good luck with that, Mum. Anyway, so when you first came out to Australia, you obviously didn't have access to a lot of the Asian ingredients you were used to. So how did your parents manage to cook sambal tauco? How did they get the ingredients?
You could buy the soybeans, yeah. But you could buy, I don't know how actually, but all I know is that Mum and Dad used to make his own tofu. He would soak the soybean seeds. He would make the drink, the whole lot.
So is that from the bought soybeans, or did you grow them?
It was bought. So soybeans, must have just put them down. I didn't take much notice because I was a child. There was certain things that I did take notice of.
But you had to do the labour, or was Grandpa doing the labour?
Grandpa was the supervisor. We were the labour.
Okay, so you were grinding the soybeans and things?
Yes, and he just used to soak it. And there was ways he did it which I didn't take notice of, which I wish I had. He used to make all his own prata, and he used to have his own, he used to sell curry and prata. First had a little caravan on one of the main roads here with another Anglo-Indian man that we knew.
First, come back into that. You just put pork mince in. What did you put between the garlic and the pork mince?
The tauco.
The tauco, anything else?
What?
Okay, there'll be a recipe for this later. So
Really?
I just want to point out, before my grandpa died, like maybe a year before, I asked him and Mum how to teach me how to make prata. And they said, what for? It's cheaper and easier to go to the Asian store and buy it frozen. So love and kisses to both of you. Anyway.
But yeah, so there was a few recipes that Mum wrote down, and my grandmother actually as well.
Your grandmother being Henrietta or Rita Baptist, who married Raymond Richards in Penang.
Yeah. And she gave me a recipe for sausage rolls, sausage meat rolls, and I've taken it down, and I've never ever done it. One day I will.
That recipe is meant to be the Peterson family recipe because her mother was Catherine Anna Peterson.
Yeah, well.
Now, I know that, remember you saying when you first came out to Australia, Grandma was unsure of what food she'd be able to get, so she smuggled in seeds, so border security style, sewing them into clothing. Very, very Asians, that's why you should always search their luggage. Anyway, so...
I declare everything now.
Sure. Anyway, do you remember what kind of seeds or...
That was about 5 minutes because we are only allowed to put up 5 minutes of video at a time. So, people who are watching, if you want to see the whole video, it'll be coming up on our YouTube channel, the whole 20-minute version of Ione interrogating her mother while her mother cooks up sambal teochew. Tauchu. Yeah, the fermented bean paste.
I say sambal taucho, but
yeah.
Who knows?
Tauchu, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Say taucho, but yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, let's. If I may, let me ask you about how you are feeling about the situation with regards to like migration, refugees. I mean, like Australia, for instance, has very strict border control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the situation is such that, it's a big country. They had a situation with boats coming in to Australia, right? What are your thoughts and feelings about the world population, because it's World Population Day, migration, urbanization, even family planning, which is part of the agenda of World Population Day, because we don't want the world to get too overpopulated. What are your feelings about that?
In terms of migration,
Mm-hmm.
I think Australia's gone the wrong way with their policy and should be encouraging more family migration. Our family migration quotas are really small, and that the more family, well, depending on your community, I guess, but the more family you have here, the better people seem to adapt or whatever. And it's really cruel when you've got only a couple of family members left back home and you can't bring them out. Our refugee policies are inhumane. I understand that the crossing by boats is dangerous and that that's not something to be encouraged. But we are a large country. We could bring in more refugees. And what we're doing with our offshore processing is incredibly expensive, incredibly cruel, and horrific. That said, in 2001, we were driving back from Perth, from Christmas in Perth, and we drove, because to drive to Darwin, you drive nearly via Adelaide, so it's a long trip. And we drove past Woomera, and that's where they had, which is about 500 kilometres north of Adelaide in the desert. And they had the refugees there at that time. And when we drove past there, I'm like, to put anyone in an environment like this and lock them up is completely inhumane. And that said, my sister now her husband's in the Air Force. She lives at Woomera. The township is quite nice. Woomera, the detention centre, was a hellhole. People can argue with me about that, but I don't care. So what we're doing
the situation with regards to our community as people who, originated from foreigners who landed in a particular land and then began to integrate or assimilate or join up with the local cultures and had children and stuff like that. That whole idea of like, intercultural liaisons, etc. I find really wonderful. But I think a lot of people tend to forget how even in our ancestral line, right, we actually were refugees. Like I know for a fact that I am refugee twice over, and it really
You're talking about the
upsets me.
Phuket and Kedah element?
Yeah, I'm talking about Malacca and then the Phuket and Kedah.
Oh, Malacca.
Yeah,
Malacca.
yeah, because when the Dutch invaded Portuguese Malacca, my ancestors fled up to Phuket. So we were refugees. And then when we were in Phuket.
Do you have any gap? See, this is the thing with family history and genealogy. We assume that our ancestors from Phuket had come from Malacca.
Yeah. Well, we don't know, but it's a possibility. I mean, I won't kind of like, but it's very possible, that some of the Portuguese Eurasians ended up in Phuket because of the Dutch.
Yeah.
I think it's a very very legitimate and valid thing to say.
It definitely ended up in Phuket because of the Dutch, but there's an assumption being that the Phuket Eurasians that came to Penang are the same, come from the same group.
No, because we were there for 100 years, and then various other Europeans or Eurasians or mixed race joined up.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the European surnames in my ancestry include French as well. I mean, like I was quite surprised to find out that I have French ancestry in both my father and my mother's side.
Yeah.
And then of course my surname, we are still, the jury is still hung on that because we're not sure. It could be Burmese, it could be Thai, but then it also could be a corruption of a Portuguese surname or a Dutch surname, which happens a lot, but the fact of the matter is, what I want to say is that I know for a fact that I would have refugee in my family line, ancestry twice over, and it was shocking to me to hear people of my ilk, meaning Eurasian Seranis, in recent times, talk about how the refugee situation is being anti-refugee or being anti foreigner, and that really kind of like makes me go, have you looked down your own family line kind of thing? Yeah. So anyway,
when you bring in refugees as a government and a society, you need to support them to be able to integrate, not assimilate, but integrate into the community and to deal with the trauma that they've gone through as refugees. So I think a lot more needs to be done in that as well. So for the people we are bringing in, that we do let in, we need to give them more support. And there's no reason why we couldn't bring in more. Canada has an interesting program where it's like sponsor a refugee. So you get together a group of friends, you come up with the money, you can bring a refugee in and you support them for a year. Yeah. And I'm thinking if they did that in Australia,
or anywhere in the world, because it's all about viralizing kindness and brotherhood of man. I mean, like, heck, if you want peace on earth and, joy to the world, that's really what you should be doing. There was a single mother who was turned away from all the inns, 2,000 plus years ago. 20.
Well, technically, she wasn't a single mother. She was married to Joseph.
Well, however, whatever, but I think there's an interesting story there, about how we really shouldn't be marginalizing people, for the color of their skin.
Our community, people forget we were marginalized. So under colonial times, even in the 50s, there were colour bars that prevented us from entering certain buildings, from doing certain jobs, from riding in certain compartments of trains, from joining certain parts of the military. There were racist colour bars that were applied to our community. And they were applied until recently. So I was interviewing someone in 2010 in Perth, And he recalled being in Singapore, walking outside the Singapore
Cricket club.
I think it's the cricket club, yeah. And they were playing the song he wrote inside, and he couldn't go in there because he was mixed.
Yeah.
So those color bars, that racism applied to us, and we've forgotten that it applied to us. So like even me being white, it would have applied to me as long as I had publicly acknowledged the rest of my family.
Yeah.
So it's not like I would ever have.
Rule.
Yeah.
You were tainted.
So we forget that we had the color bars applied to us. They even had different sort of criteria for if we went to prison, the Europeans and Eurasians were treated differently. So there was the color bars. We have, I said, ancestors who are refugees multiple times, and we're only talking about the mixed race ancestors. We're not even talking about our European or our Asian ancestors who would have been refugees at certain times as well. We had ancestors who were slaves and slave owners.
Yeah.
And so because we were mixed and we were neither Asian nor European, there was a lot of racism towards us and racism from us both. But we have become very quick to judge on that when I'm like, based on our background, we should be the ones reaching out to people.
Yes, being inclusive and, that kind of stuff. So on World Population Day, to end the show, we'll go out on that note, that we can be the bridges of understanding, that we can be the champions of justice and fairness and love and kindness to all. Okay, well. What are you laughing at? My seriousness. Towering, icons of justice and fairness and all that. Yeah. So that's how we Serani Sembang. Okay, right, Ione. Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, and I'm. Yes, send it to me soon so I can put it up with the full video of your mother doing her magic. It's such a laugh. It's such a wonderful thing to see, and I'm hoping that it'll inspire other young people, to get with their mobile phones and videotape, and then send it to me, and I'll put it up, and it can prompt all kinds of conversations about.
And if anyone wants any other recipes done, we can do that too.
Yeah. Well, Ione will do a cooking demonstration. Yeah.
No, my mother will do a cooking demonstration, and I will film it.
Yeah, I think you make a great team. Yeah. And we can start a new webcast, Teresa in her kitchen, kind of thing. Okay, wonderful. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and regards to your parents and stuff. And to Dr. Richard Dorrell, I'll get back to you. We'll do this sometime soon. And I'm gonna make you a star, Dr. Richard, because of all that we have to deal with today. Yeah. Okay, darling. Take care. All best.
See ya.
Bye, everybody. I gotta go out with our whatchamacallit, isn't it? Okay.